you go into a business because you love building that thing, right? Like I went to work at Sonos because I loved music. I was a perfect fit for that company because of my background in music. And, that really mattered. It energized me. It energized everybody in the company. But for the market, we were making hardware. And then the comps for that were terrible. So anyway, that was very eye-opening because I think, like a lot of business people, we push ourselves very, very hard. And it's just always good to know that there's only so much you can do. And there's also just a wider world out there that's going to do its own thing no matter what. We have a term, I'm sure a lot of you have heard it, called a RIF, a reduction in force. And, those are very common in venture-backed companies. And a lot of times it falls to the head of marketing to do it, right? Because you come in, there's been some softness, but the company has spent a lot because they've had a lot of access to capital. So you got to really roll your sleeves up and figure out, okay, what's the core growth driver here? And then you kind of have to strip everything else away from that. And that is very hard. And it doesn't matter how many times you do it, it never gets easier. And, you would think it would actually even be easier when you start your own company. It's even harder when you start your own company, right? And so I think that for me has been, again, the hardest part.
Hello everyone, I'm Aurélie, and why I'm speaking English today, it's because we are launching our podcast in English. And I'm excited to be here with you today, and to make things smoother, I will be with my fantastic colleagues, international one. Beside me, Olivia and Roxanne Crossley. They are partner at Daphni, and they will be co-hosting all the episode in English, because they are way better at English than I am. So welcome to the podcast, and thanks for hosting this English version.
Thank you for having us. This is great. Much easier to do it in English than in French, since I still don't really speak French. So let's jump into the good stuff. Today, we're lucky to have an American in Paris, someone who used to be the big marketing boss for famous brands like Patagonia, Nike, Sonos. Let's give a warm welcome to our guest, Joy Howard. Hey, Joy, thanks for joining us and sharing your experiences.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. I didn't realize I was on the launch in English version, so that's pretty cool.
I know. How exciting.
The inaugural guest.
I know.
Exactly. We need a star for the first one.
Yeah.
And actually literally a star. So can we take it back to your rockstar days?
Yeah.
Tell me about this. How did that happen?
Well, we can. First, I just have to make one small correction on the intro. So I was the head of marketing for Converse All Stars, which was owned by Nike. I was not the CMO at Nike, but the other stuff is totally true. It's also true that I used to be in a rock band. And actually, what's so fascinating is that the kind of music that I was making in the 90s is now back in vogue. I was in a shoegaze band.
Oh, amazing.
Yeah. And I was part of the... what we now know is the post-Nirvana major label indie gold rush. So basically after Nirvana, all the major labels thought they could make a lot of money by signing indie bands, which is how my little band in Atlanta got signed. And I did that for 6 years, made 4 albums, and then realized I needed to find a better way to make a living. I mean, obviously from 2000 onward, music was a terrible place to be. So revenues from recorded music declined by half over the next 10 years. And that was very, very tragic for lots of musicians. But the ecosystem's coming back, and so is music.
Yeah, I saw a wild stat about that actually the where we've lost the revenue from music is actually in the super users, the people who used to spend a lot of money on albums, would go to, spend $100 every weekend on albums. They're the ones who aren't spending the money, it's rough.
Well, that makes sense. That would have been me. I was definitely a very religious visitor of the local record store.
So you were the singer, or?
I sang, I played bass and piano.
Can we get a song?
Actually, you can. If you want to put it in the liner notes of the podcast, I'll send you a playlist.
Perfect.
Amazing.
Yeah, 2 of the albums are on Spotify. A third one is only on Apple Music. And none of us have ever taken the time to sort out why they aren't all on each streaming platform, because it's just complicated. And we've all moved on to other careers since then.
Wow.
Awesome. So how did being a rock star get you ready for corporate America?
Very poorly. It was, so I went to business school in 2000, and the only way I could really justify doing that, was basically by doing one of the first MBAs in sustainable enterprise. Mm-hmm. So, Gen Xers have this whole commitment to not selling out. And at the same time, you need to make a living. And sometimes it gets really hard, right? So for me, the way to do that was to focus on this area called sustainable enterprise, which is actually very emergent at the time. There was a social enterprise program at Duke, and there was a sustainable enterprise program at Chapel Hill. I was a little bit more focused on the environmental side, which is why I went the sustainable enterprise route. And, I did my MBA in that, which was great. And I actually really worried that I wouldn't get into any business schools because my only real business experience was in the band, where I did manage a lot of the band's affairs. But it was a time when people were first beginning to appreciate the importance of creativity in business. Mm-hmm. And I think as a result of that, I got great offers, full fellowship, which is really great to finish your MBA without any loans. Yeah. And I got a job at Johnson & Johnson right out of business school, working right in sustainable enterprise, which is exactly what I wanted to do, but was completely ineffective because I really knew nothing about business. And the MBA for me was like reading instructions to a board game for 2 years before you actually get to play. And so when I got into the corporate world, it was a really very intense learning opportunity for me to understand how decisions were made.
Yeah. What were the big surprises there? Speed?
Well, actually the big surprise to me was, I actually came in through the business development licensing and acquisitions group.
Okay.
And so we were incubating new business models at the intersection of human and environmental health. And, we could make these very compelling cases. We could even, do test markets. And the pitches seemed so persuasive to me, it was like, we can save millions of lives and make millions of dollars. Like, why would you say no? And we would just get told no over and over again. Gosh. And I eventually, it was hard for people to say yes because the business models were so different from the prevailing business model. It was hard for executives to say no because, like I said, we could save millions of lives and make millions of dollars. That was the biggest surprise to me, is that I kept on hearing no. And so eventually, I presented within my first year out of business school to the CEO and the president of J&J, which is a very big deal.
Of course.
And they, they loved the concept, and they said, Joy, this is great. We want you to go make it happen in the corporate contributions department. And I was not there to do philanthropy. And so that was a huge surprise to me. And it really it really made me want to understand why were they making the decisions they were making and who gets to make those decisions.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I mean, I feel like 15, 20 years ago, that sustainability focus, it was cutting edge. What's been a bit disappointing is seeing, especially in America, how slow the interests of business are with environment and other sustainability factors.
I agree. I think we have more momentum now than we ever have.
Totally.
Which is great. And especially in the world of apparel, which, as you know, is where I've been working for the last couple years, there is much more momentum. And actually it's driven by consumers. And that, that's really what has kept me, so in love with what I'm doing. When I first went into sustainable enterprise, there was this belief that, impact on the planet is basically population times affluence times technology.
Okay.
And you can't change population growth without doing really weird things. You can't change people's quest for affluence, which is basically consumption. So you have to focus on technology. But, I questioned that, and I thought, well, what if we could change this A variable, right? So that formula is very, it's a very old school formula, I equals P times A times T. And most people focus, especially in VC, on changing the T, right, the technology. And I wanted to see if I could actually reshape the A. And I've actually been able to do that, which has been really, really fun. And that's kind of been my focus ever since.
How interesting. So were you at Patagonia when they did the big Black Friday campaign of Don't Buy This?
That was an amazing campaign. Remember
yeah,
that one?
I came actually right after that.
Okay.
And it's interesting. The Patagonia had a big growth spurt right after Don't Buy This jacket. And that had basically come from Rose, the CEO, taking a more aggressive stance on inventory.
Okay.
They'd been really, as many companies have been in the apparel space, burned by having too much inventory. And so for a couple years, or maybe like a year before that and a year after that, she noticed that the company was selling everything they made. And so she asked the very sensible question of like, well, what would happen if we made more? And then they sold more. But then that kind of stalled out. And that's usually the time any company brings in a new CMO, is when there's like a little bit of a stall out on the business. So I came in right after that, Don't Buy This Jacket, when they were beginning to see a little bit of softness in the business. But I did launch Worn Wear while I was there, which has had a really big impact on the apparel industry.
Is that the campaign where you can bring any apparel back and then they'll fix it for you?
That's right.
For lifetime.
I mean, I kind of equate Worn Wear with the beginning of what we think of as the circular economy. Yeah. And the only reason I say that is because I can remember vividly how difficult it was to get it launched because nobody was doing it at the time. Worn Wear, when I got to Patagonia, was a Tumblr blog, and it was basically people sending in their stories. We asked people to send us letters with, a picture of your repaired clothing and a story about what you had done in the clothing. Yeah. And the energy around that was so intense. And as a marketer, this is what you're always looking for, right? You're looking for that kind of emotional charge that people are having with the product. At the same time, within the company, there was a young woman there who really wanted to sell used gear on the website. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And nobody was doing it. There was not a single brand that was doing it for all the obvious reasons. It will make our existing product look shabby. It will damage the brand. Mm-hmm. We're not a thrift store, and it was just completely orthogonal to how people thought of like building a premium brand. And especially Patagonia was very focused on their technical bona fides in the world of outdoor athleticism. So I basically had the idea of, the first thing was to create a little van that would go around. We basically retrofitted this diesel pickup truck with a handmade wooden trailer on the back. Cool. And put some sewing machines in the back, and we took it on tour.
And that was in the US?
That was in the US. Okay. We did do it in Europe again, but it was in a Sprinter van in Europe, not as cool as this like handmade, crazy thing but I could see the idea, the concept for the van, for the truck, the Worn Wear mobile, would be very grammable. It would bring people out who wanted to share their stories of what they'd done in their clothing. And the momentum from that allowed us to have the kind of license to operate within the company to try selling used clothes online. And the rest is history. Now almost every brand is selling their gear online. There's a whole ecosystem dedicated to enabling brands to do that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, we have companies in our portfolio who do just that, actually. I'm thinking of FUM, who's really into the second-hand market.
Yeah, exactly. It's actually a very exciting industry within Europe. Yeah, there is a lot of growth in that space here. There's Vinted, which I think everyone will be. They've had a pretty low profile, but they're building quite an impressive business over there.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's many more.
Yeah,
Vestiaire, and on and on.
Totally. Yeah, I'm a huge Real fan.
Me too. From the US. Huge Real fan.
But it's hard to get the shipments over here.
Yeah, indeed.
So sort of taking a step back, you've had this impressive career. You've been in some of the biggest boardrooms in the US. What did you want to be as a kid? Was that sort of the vision?
I wanted to be in politics as a kid. Okay. My mother was a politician.
Okay.
And there is a really funny quote that business is politics for ugly people. Have you ever?
No. Oh, really? That's amazing.
It's very funny. My mother's actually very attractive and was a very impressive politician too. But I wanted to do that. I wanted to be in the Foreign Service. Okay. But then I realized that when you're in the Foreign Service, you're actually not, you just have to toe the party line. You're not really, as a diplomat, and actually I think we could probably, especially in this moment in time, have a newfound appreciation for diplomacy. But when I realized I'm just going to be on the receiving end of all the decisions, I didn't want to do it. Yeah. I changed my mind.
You're too much of a rebel for that?
Yeah, well, I'm very principled and passionate about improving the lives of other people. And so I find that a hard thing to trade off,
Yeah. So what have been the highlights of your career? What, or the moment when you sort of looked and said, "Oh, I've made it. This is what I wanted."
Oh gosh, I don't know. There've been so many. Actually, I think being in the boardroom was a really great moment for me. Mm-hmm. And especially because, when you're coming up through the ranks, you're on the receiving end of a lot of those decisions. And so getting in the room and seeing, okay, this is how the decisions are made. This is actually how the company is valued. And I didn't really get to have exposure to that until I got to Sonos. And it was so exciting for me and very, very empowering. The founders of Sonos were very radically transparent. And also working for someone like that was a real moment to realize that you could run a business in that way where you're completely transparent with everyone in the company, especially with your executives. That was a really great moment for me, I think.
Oh, that's great. So,
but there have been a lot. I'm just picking that one out because you mentioned the boardroom.
Was there maybe like a conversation or like a presentation that comes to mind that you really thought, wow, I've made a difference here?
You know what? Honestly, for me, the thing that is most energizing for me is always the learning aspect of that experience. And so, sitting through the first time, everybody gets these offer letters, which is like, okay, you're going to get this many options, at the discretion of the board at the next board meeting. The price will be set at the next board meeting. It's kind of just like boilerplate that you see in every offer letter. But then actually sitting there and seeing how the company was valued, it just opened my eyes to so much, because it's in the valuation of the company, you see the core drivers of everything that you're working on in the business. You see them come together. Mm-hmm. And then you also see how absolutely meaningless that is, because it also depends on what the market is for the company, which is basically comes in the comparables and stuff like that. And that was very eye-opening to me. And it basically, it's what business is about, right? You're going to do your best every day. And there will always be quite a few things that are outside of your control. Like your comp set, you go into a business because you love building that thing, right? Like I went to work at Sonos because I loved music. I was a perfect fit for that company because of my background in music. And, that really mattered. It energized me. It energized everybody in the company. But for the market, we were making hardware. And then the comps for that were terrible. So anyway, that was very eye-opening, because I think, like a lot of business people, we push ourselves very, very hard. And it's just always good to know that there's only so much you can do. Yeah. And there's also just a wider world out there that's going to do its own thing no matter what. Yeah, it reminds me so much of my experience at Blue Apron, which was exactly that, like super emotional attachment to people. We were creating incredible meals for them to cook. They had these experiences. We all loved food in the company. And the private markets got it. We were a tech play. Public markets saw us as grocery. I remember that Blue Apron moment so clearly, because I work in marketing, and I can remember the early bloggers kind of picking apart the S1 and really looking at the numbers in performance marketing. I mean, I devoured all of those blogs because I was at Lyft at the time. We were just pre-IPO. Another really great moment in my career to be there for that IPO. And just seeing the Blue Apron story unravel and essentially go from being the darling, of the VC-backed consumer world to a penny stock was wild. Yeah, and just last week, bought by Wonder. So I don't even know what Wonder is. It's Mark Laurie's old company, or new company, I guess. Yeah. But it's those feelings that you had about what you were giving people in that business, that stays with you forever. Yeah. And that's what really energizes you to come to work every day, is like that thing that you're giving to other people. Mm. I mean, even at the Lyft IPO, which is another like close second for me in terms of peak moments, what mattered to me, because I was very late to that business. I came in probably like 6 months before the IPO. Okay. And it was clear this was a big moment for everybody that had been working so hard. And I gave them a killer moment. I gave them just a freaking beautiful experience, seeing their families there and just the joy of everyone that was involved in that moment. And that I had kind of, with my team, been able to create this space for celebration and to kind of memorialize that achievement, or to basically, mark that milestone was really cool. Oh, that's incredible. It's about what you can give to other people business at the end of the day, like especially in the consumer space. Yeah, for sure. It's the moments that you remember. That's right. Yep. That's right. So on the flip side,
is there always a flip side?
What were the disappointments? I mean, what was the time when you were, whether it was sitting in the boardroom or something else, and going, this is not what I thought it would be? Well, there's a lot of euphemisms in business. And they usually are there to veil
the really hard stuff, right? So we have a term, I'm sure a lot of you have heard it, called a RIF, a reduction in force. And, those are very common in venture-backed companies. And a lot of times it falls to the head of marketing to do it, right? Because you come in, there's been some softness, but the company has spent a lot because they've had a lot of access to capital. So you got to really roll your sleeves up and figure out, okay, what's the core growth driver here? And then you kind of have to strip everything else away from that. And that is very hard. And it doesn't matter how many times you do it, it never gets easier. And, you would think it would actually even be easier when you start your own company. It's even harder when you start your own company, right? And so I think that for me has been, again, the hardest part.
Yeah, that's, it's always tough moments.
It's always tough moments. What's that George Clooney film, Up in the Air?
It's especially if you put a human, like if people is, your main driver, which you were telling us about.
I think there's a change happening, especially among young people right now, about how intertwined their identities are with work. And I think this is what's made it very hard in the past. Those of us who've had to make those decisions, we know how they're made. Okay. And then you go in there and you have the conversation.
And that's the hard part, huh?
Exactly. But what you see if you're on the side of the table letting someone go is, you see the primal fear, the disappointment, the self-doubt, which in reality has so little to do with that person and their capability, and so much more to do with some of these macroeconomic factors that we talked about already once. And so I think it's really important, the way in which young people are starting to separate their identities from work a little bit. I realize it's a hard thing to do because we love this idea of self-actualization through work. I mean, that's why everybody loves Steve Jobs. That's why we love Yvonne. We love this idea that work can be this ultimate expression of who we are. But there's a very few people in the world that can actually have that, and so don't be too hard on. Don't be too hard on yourself if it's not happening for you.
We're gonna ask what would be the advice maybe to the young generation.
I think that would be it. I think it would be to realize that you have to have a self and a set of relationships and activities that really constitute who you are outside of work.
And I think that's, as two Americans in Paris, I think that was, at least I know, a driver for me coming here is how can I do what I love, but then also do it in a way that I am not my job. What was your driver for moving to France?
I think everyone who comes here is attracted by that on some level. And you honestly, feel it all across Europe. The moment you walk into a town square and you see everybody out in the cafes and, having conversations, and you almost, it's like a big sigh. Like you can feel the relaxation in the air.
Totally.
Versus in the States where there's this kind of like hard edged metallic whine everywhere you go, sort of like a high pitched humming of anxiety almost everywhere. And so I think on some level, everybody who comes here is coming to seek that. And I think it's important to find the balance because we see that people are feeling more lonely. We see that, communities have, fallen apart. We see the gap between the rich and the poor happening in the States is not necessarily something to emulate. And it also opens up this whole wider conversation that's happening right now around the decline of Europe, which I don't know if you want to talk about that, but it's pretty fascinating. Are you guys following this?
No, so tell me more. I'm like,
I have a big blanket.
I just moved here. I think it's great.
Yeah, it is pretty great. And there's a lot of great things. I mean, to live in a place with such high functioning infrastructure is so incredible. And to see the expansion of bike lanes every day, to just, roll out of your front door into the metro and it gets you wherever you want to go in 15 minutes with no stress is just unbelievable. Yeah. Getting from point A to B in the US is so filled with stress and all kind of stuff. But there's a discourse emerging that Europe is in decline. And it comes from seeing the growth of GDP in the US and in China and the flatlining of the GDP here. And it's a really hot debate, that's happening. And I'm watching it very closely because obviously I'm trying to build a business here, but also because I think many people have gotten to a point where they really don't feel like GDP is the true measure of how well a society is doing. And so I feel like it all comes together around this conversation of like, whither Europe.
Yeah. Well, and sort of to your point about affluence being one of those drivers and consuming more, is it possible for us to always consume more? And yeah.
It's not. We know there's limits to the earth sets the limit. it sets the boundary. It's a budget, just like any other budget that you have to deal with, like how much we can actually take from the earth, how much pollution we can generate. And so we're all coming up against that and finding a way to make a living, to live the good life that is regenerating earth, regenerating ourselves, right? I mean, how exhausted have we been by work, by parenting and work, by even just showing up as who we are at work can be really exhausting, especially for women, for people of color. It can be really, really exhausting. So I think this alternative vision of, okay, we're going to do work that's regenerative. We're going to do it in a way that's regenerative. I really hope that Europe can lead the way on that. And I think it is leading the way on that. You see it in clean energy. You see it in the circular economy. And these things don't happen, they happen slowly, then all at once. And so my vision of where we go from here is that we really pioneer here in Europe a way to grow the economy that doesn't come at the expense of other people and doesn't come at the expense of the earth.
Maybe,
yes, please.
Yeah. Because you actually launched your own company now.
I did.
And you did it you chose to do it in Europe. So you must obviously think that Europe is, the right place to do so, I guess.
I did, actually. I mean, I was very much thinking from the consumer and not the operational perspective, though. That was my blind spot. Mm-hmm. So I thought Paris would, I have an outerwear company. We make outerwear. And specifically, we do it because, I've always felt like there wasn't really great outerwear that could get you, just one particular kit that could get you from the city to the country. Mm-hmm. The outerwear for men always looked cool, and then it always looked lame for women. It would be like shrink it and pink it, or like it'd be a cool orange jacket for a guy, but like a peach one for a woman. So, and cycling was the where I really felt that loss or that lack of like, I need to go from bike to boardroom to bar to backcountry, one jacket, one kit. And Paris seemed like the perfect place for that because it was, even before I moved here 4 years ago, Velib was first pioneered here. Bike sharing was first pioneered here. So it was already kind of a emergent cycling nirvana, and people care a lot about what they look like. So I thought, okay, Paris would be the perfect place to do that from a consumer perspective. Obviously, I was completely blind to all the operational complexity that comes from starting a business in France.
Yes. We could do a whole podcast about that.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast about that. But you do then learn. I mean, that's how it works. That's how it works in business. You can read a lot of, you can have a great strategy deck. You can read your HBR article, and then you got to do it. You're going to learn way more by doing it than any other way.
Totally. So what, going back to your brand, to early majority, what drove that transition to entrepreneurship and to launching that brand?
I mean, honestly, I got a lot of encouragement. Mm-hmm. It was never something, I didn't grow up in kind of a business household, as we've already mentioned. My family was more focused on public service. Mm-hmm. And I just got encouragement, especially from one of the board members. I mean, my early angels were board members from companies where I've worked before. Oh, nice. And particularly John Maida, who was on the board at Sonos, really encouraged me. The founder of Sonos really encouraged me. Jim Getz, who was on the board at Dashlane, was my first angel. And, really it was just their encouragement. I had the idea. I had the frustration. Like most new businesses are born from frustration. And then I had the idea. And then I started to get encouragement. And then the pandemic happened, and we all realized life could be a lot shorter, than we thought. So that's what caused me to take the leap.
Nice. Should we go to from 10 to 2?
Yeah, perfect.
Wait, what is that?
Right. Yeah.
I'm in suspense.
So 10 to 2 is kind of, it's that concept of we currently spend, I guess,
produce
on average 10 tons of CO2 equivalent emissions per year.
Per person, right?
Per person.
And I should note that the U.S., I believe, is almost double that. So that is a European average, not a U.S. one.
And to hold the climate goals that were set during the Paris Climate Agreement, we have to go down to 2 tons. So, divided by quite a lot. Do you think that's achievable?
Oh, yeah.
And what do you do personally to achieve that?
Okay, so the first thing that we have to understand about going from 10 to 2, and thanks for educating me on that concept, now I know, is we have to reject the notion that that is going to be an impoverishing experience, okay? So one of the things that people who are climate deniers, they all make fun of Greta Thunberg. You know, she's sitting in her, like, you know, hair shirt, eating porridge by candlelight, you know, like they don't have any fun, all these environmentalists. Not true. We can do it while increasing our quality of life. And I'm just going to give you a few examples because I've experienced this so viscerally and so personally in my own transition from driving to cycling.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I did it in the beginning because back when I was a starving artist, I didn't have much money, and I did it basically to save money. But cycling opened up a whole new world for me. I could have this crazy cool experience of the city that I'd never had before. I got physically fit, which gave me more confidence. I felt good in my body. And even, you know, when I was no longer a starving artist, but a successful executive, I found that biking to work would always put me in a great frame of mind by the time I got there. I feel so strong and clear-headed. And I could always leave the stress of work behind and come home in a similar mind state because I'd biked. So that to me is kind of like one of the archetypal examples of how consuming less can enrich you. Mm-hmm. And I think everybody is, you know, there's so many more ways in which that can happen. Another big shift, I'll give you another example, is the rise in uniform dressing and the circular economy. So this is a big day in music. I don't know if you guys know who Andre 3000 is, but his first album in 17 years comes out today. It's very unlike anything he's ever done before. It's sort of like experimental ambient flute music.
Have you heard it already?
Yeah, I listened to it on the way over here, of course. But in the interview for that, he has this outfit. He's actually in the laundromat, first of all, which most people would say, oh, laundromat, you know, like who goes to the laundromat? Doesn't everybody have their own washer and dryer? Which if you live in Paris, you know, we do not all have our own washer and dryer. And I've actually been going to the laundromat to dry my clothes since I moved here. So first of all, he does an interview with GQ magazine in the laundromat. But what you notice if you pay close attention is that the laundry that he's doing is probably like 8 of the same outfit that he's wearing.
I love it.
And he talks about the luxury of not having to think about what he's wearing every day. And that is a luxury. So, you know, I think fewer, better, longer lasting garments is a way to enrich our lives, but also consume less carbon. So I just gave you 2 examples that are very core, right? Transportation is a $2 trillion industry. I don't know, probably more than that. And the apparel industry is also gigantic. I should definitely know how big it is, but you know, it's gigantic. And so those are 2 radical transformations in the heart of extremely carbon intensive industries that can happen in a way that really enriches our lives.
Oh, love those examples.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. So to wrap up on a lighter note, what was the last great concert you went to? Great show.
Well, I just went to the Brian Eno concert here in Paris, at La Scène Musicale, and it was really incredible. He played with the Baltic Sea Orchestra, and you know, the instrumentation was so wild. It was like every instrument you can imagine. They even had a tuba.
No way.
The tuba was fantastic. A lot of really young people on the stage. Very experimental, but also just very, very beautiful. And that was the very last concert I went to. And that is also one of the wonderful things about being in Paris. Yeah. Every single musician comes here.
Yes.
I missed the PJ Harvey concert, which I'm still very upset about. And if there's anyone out there that's, you know, looking for a business challenge, please figure out how to connect something. Please create some app that will tell me when the music that I listen to, when that band is in town. It's very hard to buy tickets.
Totally.
It's very hard to get a notification. This is one area where I'm completely inelastic on price. Okay. Yeah. I like to see PJ Harvey. I won't even tell you how much I would have spent. I didn't even know she was in town. So tragic. So I wish someone would solve that problem. And I think there'll be a big business in that.
So, I will also subscribe to that business.
Yeah, exactly.
I hear your pain.
And Spotify, these APIs are open, right?
Yeah,
so let's do it.
If you're listening and looking for an idea, you've already got 2 clients. I wanted to ask one last question.
Let's do it.
I don't know your level of French. What's the hardest French word to pronounce?
Okay. French is very hard because it's so contextual. Like lit can be I'm reading and also bed, right? So it just depends on the context.
Totally.
The word where and the word or are spelled the same way, aren't they? But one is oo and one is oo. And it's just like, right. It's literally the same word. So I would just say, like, are you asking me where it is, or are you saying or? But you would know it based on the context. So, I mean, I've only been learning French for like 100 and maybe 28 days because I started on Duolingo 128 days ago. And have a 128 day streak on Duolingo, which I'm bragging about. But yeah, maybe it's like read in bed is hard, Lee and Lee, and or and where.
Nice. We were having this exact conversation with Olivia this morning about c'est chaud, which can be a very positive thing. Like it's really like hot on the topic of the moment. Or c'est chaud. It's that's a bit harsh, or that's a bit hard, and I was saying to Olivia, I'm sorry, it's exactly the same word.
And I was like, how am I supposed to read this? Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Context. It's very contextual, isn't it? And I mean, I think the more I learn about the language, the more I understand about French culture.
Yeah.
And a lot of subtlety, and a lot of context.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's so interesting is, we're both American. We have a very low context culture and low context way of speaking. So we are explicit, we're direct. That's what's considered good speech. In France, there is a much more common shared background here. And the language shows it.
And it lends itself to a different way of thinking that is so important right now. I mean, I marvel all the time at how much of my experience of the world as an American has really been determined by the history of France. I mean, the two countries have such an intertwined history, right? There would be no French Revolution without the American Revolution. There would be no American Revolution without French thought.
Yes.
Same with feminism. So many of the progressive movements of our time were really born here. And the kind of backlash against that sort of thing. So, really interesting place to be. Could anyone explain to me why the French counting is so strange?
What do you mean?
Like
1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Like why instead of saying like 80, it's like 420s.
Yeah. I have that question too.
84.
We're looking at you guys.
And then you've not been to Belgium yet, because they have like a way different way.
Is it simpler in Belgium?
No, it's way harder.
Oh no.
90 something. Yeah.
Why is it like that?
I have no idea, Joy.
To keep us on our toes.
Exactly.
We need like a linguistic archaeologist kind of to come in here and explain this to us. Anyway, we can't answer all the questions on this podcast today.
Well, thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's been so fun. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you so much, Joy.
Yeah, thanks, Olivia, for co-hosting this first one in English, and Aurélie, obviously, for the marvelous English introduction. I think I'm supposed to say 2 things. If you're listening to this podcast and you liked it, please share it. And obviously, we'd like to see you and have you listen to the next episode of this series. Thank you very much, everyone.
Okay. Thanks.
Thanks.